Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Ravnica Allegiance Guild Guide. Today we are going to be looking at Rakdos, one of the most aggressive guilds in Ravnica Allegiance. But before we dive into it, I do want to remind you that if you enjoy the video, be sure to hit that thumbs up. If this video gets to 50 thumbs up, I guarantee I will be making another guild guide. Be sure to leave in the comments section down below which guild you want to see me do next. Also, if you have any questions about cards or anything about the guild or anything I say, or just questions about Ravnica Allegiance in general, be sure to leave those in the comments section down below. I really do love interacting with all of you folks and answering your questions. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get updates whenever I post new content, including new installments into the Guild Guide series. But without further ado, let's get into the guide. Okie doke. So, first of all, what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to talk about what Rakdos wants to be doing in Ravnica Allegiance. Then we're going to discuss how to draft Rakdos, and then we are going to be discussing key cards and synergies in Rakdos. So the mission statement for Rakdos, I have it as curve out to enable Spectacle, which is the Rakdos mechanic, which lets you pay an alternate cost and sometimes get an alternate effect when you play your cards if you have dealt damage to the opponent. So curve out to enable Spectacle and use strong removal to push damage in the mid-game. Finish things off by overwhelming the opponent or with pings and incidental damage. There are a lot of Rakdos effects that have deal 2 damage to the opponent or deal 1 damage to the opponent built in, so you can sometimes get them low and then slowly finish them off with those effects. But that is the Rakdos mission statement, in my opinion. When you're drafting Rakdos, there are several things to keep in mind. You want to draft a mix of Spectacle cards and early creatures to trigger them. So you want to be curving out with Spectacle, because if you can play a 2-drop and they don't play a 2-drop, you can then hit them, play your 3-drop that potentially has Spectacle, and gain an advantage that way. When there are also some creatures that are really good with Spectacle because they can deal damage to the opponent without attacking, like they'll tap and deal damage to each player, or they'll be unblockable by certain types of creatures, and those are really nice as well because they can help you trigger your Spectacle cards at the beginning of the game, but also in the mid-game when you have a stalled board, you can still trigger Spectacle thanks to these creatures. Another thing that you want to be doing when you're drafting Rakdos is taking the removal highly, but you have to remember that you have to prioritize strong creatures as well, because Rakdos has so many removal spells in this set. I think they have like 5 at the common level alone, that you are potentially going to get flooded on removal, which may not sound like a bad thing, but when you're an aggressive deck looking to attack the opponent, if you only have 13 creatures, you can definitely find yourself in situations where you have like 3 removal spells in hand and your opponent is just playing a long, slow controlling game and you don't have any targets for that, and you end up losing the late game. So make sure you don't take too much removal, but that is not always going to happen. So do take removal, but remember to take creatures as well, especially the good ones. The top commons for Rakdos gets some very good commons. This was actually a really difficult list to make, and I did edit it several times. But number 1, undoubtedly, is Skewer the Critics. This is pretty much the perfect card for Rakdos. It has Spectacle for 1 red mana, and it does 3 damage to any target. So it is basically a lightning bolt if you can hit the opponent with a creature or deal damage to them in some way, and Lightning Bolt is a broken card in modern-day limited formats. It's also really nice because it's not uncastable if you don't enable Spectacle. It's still just 3 mana, deal 3 damage to any target. You can use that to burn the opponent out. You can use it to kill their creature so that you can attack in unopposed with your creatures. So I think Skewer the Critics is going to be awesome in this set, especially in Rakdos, and I think it is a very early pick because it can also be used in Gruul as a red-green card, and I think it will be pretty good there as well. So definitely a very high pick and a card you should take early and play often. That's a saying I like to say with these type of cards. Next up, as number 2 common for Rakdos, I have Grotesque Demise. Another removal spell. I think you're getting the vibe of how many good removal spells Rakdos has available to them. 3 mana, exile target creature with power 3 or less. This card is also a monocolored card. It can work in the Orzhov guild, the black-white guild, so I think it is another pretty high pick because it seems very effective at getting rid of early blockers. Another thing it is good for is a lot of cards that have Riot come in relatively small and they get a counter on them, so you can sometimes snipe a creature that comes in as a 3/3 before it gains the counters from Riot, or alternately, Simic has the adapt mechanic, so if they spend like 6 mana to adapt their creature or 5 mana to adapt their creature, and it started off small and was going to get big, you can Grotesque Demise in response, make them waste all of that mana and kill the creature. So Grotesque Demise is going to be a very high pick as well, I think. Get the point. is one of the signature Rakdos cards. Only Rakdos can really utilize it effectively, though Orzhov may splash it depending on how much splashing happens in this format. 5 mana, unconditional removal, and you get to scry. And at this point on your curve, in Rakdos, you're probably not going to have any cards that cost more than 5, so any lands you scry away are basically draw a card. I think Get the Point is very effective, but it is quite expensive. So I think that you don't necessarily want too many copies of it, probably 2 copies, and then after that they go vastly down, because you can definitely get flooded on 5 drops in a aggressive deck like this. Number 4, I actually have Rakdos Roustabout. I think it's really interesting as a card because it is a 3 mana 3/2, which doesn't look inspiring, but it can enable your spectacle cards even in the mid game. So you attack your 3/2 into their board, they block it with their own 3/3 or something like that. You still deal damage to them, so you can enable your other Rakdos cards. Also, if you can get multiple Rakdos Roustabouts, I don't know how to pronounce that necessarily. If you can get multiples of them, then it can really threaten the opponent in the late game, because if they're at 5 life and you have 2 Rakdos Roustabouts, all you need is a Skewer the Critics and you win the game. And also, a 3/2 does trade with a lot of creatures, so it's not going to be a small body by any means. That card, however, is the type of card that is very deck dependent. I could definitely see taking other commons over it in certain situations. There is a 2 mana deal 2 damage in this set. I didn't list it on the top commons because I didn't want to just only list removal spells. And 2 mana to deal 2 damage is not super efficient. It's like a fine card, but not insane. So I don't think it's like the greatest card. I forget exactly what it's called, but 1 and a red, deal 2 damage is what the card does. So I think Rakdos Roustabout fulfills a role that is really important in Rakdos that other like smaller removal spells or less efficient removal spells don't. And then I have Blade Juggler, which is really close with Rakdos Roustabout. I could see taking Blade Juggler over the Roustabout. I think that this is one of the best payoffs for Rakdos because 3 mana 3/2 draw a card, deal 1 damage to yourself is a really good deal. It's an efficient creature. You don't really mind playing 3 mana 3/2s a lot of the time, especially if they have upside like this. Drawing a card, replacing itself on a very efficient body is great. So Blade Juggler and Rakdos Roustabout are very interchangeable, and I think that earlier on in a draft I might even take the Blade Juggler just because it can actually go into another color combination, whereas the Roustabout can't. But anyway, those are just some comments. I really do enjoy talking about the cards, so I may have gotten carried away a bit. But next up we have the Rakdos All Stars. These are the best of the best. Of course, the Skewer card that I just mentioned on the previous page, I already forgot the name, I'm sorry. The 3 mana deal 3 is obviously going to be an All-Star as well, but these are the All-Star uncommons, the cards that make you want to play Rakdos. If you see them early, they can maybe be assigned to jump in. Cult Guildmage is the Guildmage for Rakdos, and it's actually quite effective. Its 4 mana ability can allow you to grind with the slower decks and potentially even outpace them in late game scenarios. Because they're just having their resources stripped. And the second ability is exactly what Rakdos wants, a cheap way, unblockable, to enable their spectacle cards. Next up, we have Light Up the Stage. This is a card that I initially misread, and so I didn't truly value it. Light Up the Stage says until the end of your next turn. So if you are able to use this, then you can play the cards the turn afterward. So imagine this scenario of turn 3, you attack them, play Light Up the Stage for spectacle cost, play a 2-drop off of it, and the next turn you have like 3 mana available. You can like basically just use whatever cards you have more effectively because you have an extra turn to cast them. It's not until the end of this turn, it's until the end of your next turn. So Light Up the Stage is really going to be an efficient card. Rakdos Firewheeler is really good as well. Also, Light Up the Stage is good just without spectacle cost. It's basically like a red divination in many cases, so keep that in mind as well. Rakdos Firewheeler is the black, red card for Rakdos, and it is really, really, really good. 4 mana 4/3 is already a reasonable body, and then dealing 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to the opponent is just really good. It isn't really a great spectacle enabler because 4 mana, you don't really have much mana left over to do spectacle things, but the incidental damage can really add up, and doing 2 damage to a creature will often kill a real creature like a 3/2 or a 2/2 or a Guildmage or something like that. Hackrobat is one of the best reasons to run 1-drops in Rakdos, because if you can get a Hackrobat into play on turn 2, you're oftentimes going to win the game. It's just a very efficient creature, and even later in the game, on turn 3, or 4, if you hit them, you can play Hackrobat and maybe another spell alongside it. And then finally, we have Carnival Carnage. I did try to turn it sideways, but it was glitching. Basically, I think Carnival which is, I'll read it for you so you don't have to turn your head sideways like I always do when I read these cards. It's an instant that is deal 1 damage to target creature and deal 1 damage to the creature's controller. To the creature's controller. Oh yeah, you can also target planeswalkers, which isn't very relevant. So basically, it's a cheap way to enable Spectacle. So on turn 3, you can go like Carnival, then Acrobat if you aren't able to attack your opponent, and you can oftentimes kill a small creature. So it makes 1 toughness creatures a lot worse. And then Carnage is just really effective. It's pretty much like Blightning. It deals 3 damage to the opponent, and they discard 2 cards. So that it's not obviously a great Spectacle enabler because you don't really need it to be. Carnival is the Spectacle enabler part of the card, but Carnage can be very brutal against opponents. They'll be working their mana up. They'll like play their 5th land, and then play a 5-drop, and then they'll have 2 cards left in their hand. They're both spells because they have been missing land drops or something like that, and then you take both their cards, deal 3 damage to them. It can also just be really nice reach. Deal 3 is a really nice effect sometimes, and the flexibility overall makes Carnival Carnage a really nice card. So definitely an all-star card that makes me want to play Rakdos in this set. Okie doke, here are some synergy pieces for Rakdos, cards that you really want to put in your deck, but they're not like all-stars, they're not like top commons. These are just cards that Rakdos will want to be playing a lot of the time, in my opinion. First up, we have Rakdos Trumpeter, 1 and a black for a 1/3 menace, which may seem like bad stats, but then you remember that at that stage of the game, the opponent doesn't really have the tools to block it effectively, which means that you're going to be enabling your Spectacle. Sorry about that, folks, that I forgot the name of that. You're going to be enabling Spectacle very, very efficiently with this card because they're just not going to be able to block it. And then even later in the game, it's going to be able to trade with multiple creatures because they'll block it and you'll be able to pump it once, even twice sometimes. And a 3/3 menace is definitely a scary threat. So I think Rakdos Trumpeter is going to find a home in a lot of Rakdos decks. Next up, we have Footlight Fiend. And these are in no particular order, by the way. These are just cards that I think are going to be pretty good in Rakdos. Footlight Fiend, 1 mana, 1/1 that can deal 1 damage to any target when it dies. I think it's going to be really kind of a cute creature. You're not going to play it all the time, but if you have 2 mana, like enough Spectacle cards, what's the card called? I'm sorry, I'm going to go back for a second. If you have Acrobats, if you have some Acrobats, you're going to want a bunch of 1-drops. So if you have 2 Acrobats, you're going to play like multiple 1-drops to try to enable the turn 2 Acrobat. And Footlight Fiend can really get the job done. It does trade with 2/2s, and it can attack early on. It also is a guaranteed Spectacle trigger for your other threats. So you can attack with it and accept that it's going to die, and then just deal 1 damage to the opponent. And play your other Spectacle cards, which is pretty nice. It's also like some extra reach for the deck because sometimes the opponent will be at a low life total and you can just get them with your Footlight Fiend. Spear Spewer is a card that I think is really, really good for Rakdos. I think that it's going to be pretty underrated at first, but I think it's going to generally grow on people because it's a 1 mana 0/2 that can deal 1 damage to each player, and newer players in particular tend to vastly underestimate the benefits of symmetrical effects like this, because in a Rakdos deck where you're pressuring your opponent, you care a lot more about the damage that they're taking than the damage you're taking. So if you had a card that was like 1 mana, deal 5 to the opponent, deal 6 to yourself, and you knew you were playing against a slow opponent, then that card would be pretty good because they're not going to be pressuring you, so you're dealing 5 damage to them for 1 mana, which is just really brutal for them. And Spear is not like, is different from that, but it pings them every turn, so you can enable your Spectacle cards each and every turn of the game. It's a 1-drop, which is oftentimes a slot that you don't really use very often. It can also be like a nice little clock for the opponent. If they can stabilize after your early onslaught, your Spear that you draw late is still beneficial because oftentimes you're going to be able to get them relatively low, and then Spear can finish the job. In a similar vein, Fireblade Artist might not look insane, but its base stats are okay. 2 mana, 2/2 with haste is already pretty good. And then the extra ability is just additional upside. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can sacrifice a creature, and when you do, it does 2 damage to the opponent. So if you get the opponent down to 6 life and you have a Fireblade Artist in play, they have to end the game or kill your Fireblade Artist, your 2-drop, or threaten to lose the game. So Fireblade Artist, I think, is going to be a really nice synergy piece for Rakdos. It's not really a card you build around, it's just a card that's going to be very good. Especially at enabling Spectacle, because you can even like sacrifice itself to enable Spectacle on key turns if you need that. And then Tin Street Dodger is another card similar to Spear Spewer. I think it's worse than Spear Spewer because you have to spend mana to make it ping the opponent. but it doesn't ping yourself. So in certain matchups, maybe it'll be better. It also has the power, so it can trade for things in certain matchups. But on the downside, though, it can be blocked by creatures with Defender. So Tin Street Dodger is another way to enable Spectacle. I think it's probably the worst of these options. That and Footlight Fiend are the worst ones, but they're all playable in the right decks and definitely key synergy pieces to keep in mind for Rakdos. Here are some cards that I think are traps for Rakdos. I think I'm going to go through them one by one, and I think that these are cards you probably shouldn't be playing in your Rakdos decks, especially at the pre-release. People are probably going to be trying them out, and even if you get wrecked by one of these cards, I want you to remember that these cards are probably not where you want to be in Rakdos. First up, we have Cavalcade of Calamity. It's the type of effect that people love playing. I don't know why, but it basically makes it so that whenever your small creatures attack your opponent, your creatures with 1 or less power, it does 1 damage to that player. So it's kind of like an Anthem effect for them, but not really, because the creatures usually die when they attack. So I think Cavalcade of Calamity is a card that you're going to like lose to, because I feel like there's going to be a deck built around the Goblin card, the card that like 3 mana make 2 goblins and then make an extra goblin for each other time you've cast it. It's like a instant, it's a sorcery in this set, but I feel like there are going to be people trying to force that card and Cavalcade of Calamity and stuff like that, but I just don't think the card is very good. Really avoid playing it. Act of Treason was a card that really got me, because I looked at Act of Treason and then I saw a card in black that let you sacrifice creatures, and I was like, wow, I know what Rakdos is trying to do. They're trying to steal your opponent's creatures and then sacrifice them. But there's really only like 2 cards or maybe even 1 card in the Rakdos color combination that sacrifices the cards efficiently, so I don't think Act of Treason is actually that good. That being said, sometimes you'll have a draft where you end up with multiple cards that sacrifice creatures, or maybe you'll get a rare that cares about sacrificing creatures, and then of course, yes, you can play Act of Treason, and sometimes you can play Act of Treason in your aggressive decks if you're aggressive enough, just because taking a creature for a turn can be effective enough, but in general, I think that Act of Treason is going to be like not where you want to be in Rakdos. I think you'd rather just have other effects. You usually have enough reach without Act of Treason, so don't just play it blindly in every Rakdos deck because you have one way to enable the sacrifice. That often does cost a lot of mana too, because it'll be like a 4 mana spell that requires sacrificing. So I don't think Act of Treason is insane, but it's definitely one that tripped me up, and I think it could trip other people up too, so I included it on the traps page. Rafter Demon is a card that I think is quite poor, and I think it's really weird that Spectacle is 5 mana instead of 3 mana. I think that's like really bizarre. I guess, yeah, it's just really weird to me. I don't think it would have been broken at 3, and I think it's really bad at 5. So basically, you have the option of playing a 4 mana 4/2, which is horrific. 3 mana 4/2s are generally like medium to subpar. Or you can pay 5 mana if you've dealt damage to the opponent this turn, and when it enters the battlefield, the opponent discards a card. So if the Spectacle cost was 3 mana, then it would be a really good card, but not overpowered in my opinion, because it's sometimes you don't enable Spectacle, sometimes you're on the draw and they have a blocker or something like that, and you have to play your 4 mana 4/2, which is not great. But Spectacle 5 just makes this card really bad, because also in the middle to late stages of the game, it gets harder and harder to enable Spectacle because your opponent has blockers. So you'll have to like chump attack with a creature and lose a creature to get your other creature through, so that you can make them discard a card with your 4/2 that's probably not going to be effective on the board anyway. So I think Rafter Demon is a trap, and I'm actually really disappointed in Rafter Demon. I think it's a missed opportunity. If it cost 3 mana, it would be much better, and I'd be happier. I don't think it would be broken by any stretch of the imagination. Next up, we have Bankrupt in Blood. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to sacrifice 2 creatures. That's just too much. It's unplayable and limited. I feel like someone's going to try and play this card, and it's going to end badly. So just don't play this card. Never put it in your deck. And then Cry of the Carnarium is a card that I think is actually good, but not in Rakdos, because you're killing your own creatures. And if you have Cry of the Carnarium in your hand, a lot of the time you're not going to be able to cast it. And the games where you are going to want to cast it, it's going to really mess with your game plan, because you're going to want to like save your creatures and not put pressure on your opponent and wait for them to overextend, which oftentimes isn't going to happen, or they're going to have one big guy that doesn't kill. So I think Cry of the Carnarium is just really contrary to plan in Rakdos, and is really going to punish you more than your opponent if you put it in your deck. So I don't think you should play it. Okie doke, now that we've gone through all those cards, there are some things to remember about Rakdos. First of all, 2-drops are crucial for any aggro deck. I mean, Rakdos especially, because you want to enable Spectacle. There are some pretty powerful 3 mana Spectacle cards that you want to be enabling. So you really want to have at least 6 in your aggressive decks. So at the pre-release, if your Rakdos deck doesn't have like 6 2-drops, make sure you have like a couple 1-drops. In Sealed, it's not as important because your opponents don't have as many 2-drops, so you can sometimes get away with it. But in Sealed, you really want to like if you're going to be trying to build a Rakdos aggressive deck, and I know at the sealed pre-release you're going to have a sealed booster probably. I'm not 100% sure if they're bringing that back, but I'm assuming they're bringing that back. So you're going to have a sealed booster pack, and you're going to be able to maybe have some extra Rakdos cards. But in normal sealed pools like a GPs and things like that, you want to make sure that you're going to have 6 if you're going to try and build an aggressive deck. Though you can build grindier in depending on what rares you get. And in draft especially, which is what this guide is mostly focused on, if you're building a draft deck, don't be stingy when it comes to 2-drops. Like 6 2-drops, 7 2-drops, even 8 2-drops can be really good in Rakdos. And also be careful of sacrifice synergies. A lot of the cards that say sacrifice a card on them are pretty bad, so don't fall for that trap. And then finally, don't go overboard on removal. It may seem like a weird tip. Don't go overboard on removal because you can almost never have too much removal, but I feel like in Rakdos you could fall into the trap of, oh, this is a really good removal spell. Oh, this is a good removal spell. Oh, this is a good removal spell. Oh, this is a medium removal spell, but I guess I'll take it. And then you end up with 4 great removal spells, 2 medium ones, and then you don't have enough good creatures, and you end up regretting taking some medium removal. So don't go overboard on removal. The last but not least, how do you beat Rakdos as other guilds? First of all, play cheap creatures. Those creatures can block their creatures, stop their spectacle guys from snowballing out of control, and I think that's probably the best way to beat Rakdos. Next up, make trades to prevent spectacle. I mean, that's in the same vein, but a lot of the time you'll play your 2-drop, and your 2-drop's going to have late game relevance. Like maybe it's in a 2-drop that has adapt, or you'll play your 3-drop and that 3-drop has adapt, and so you'll want to save your creature. But a lot of the time, you really just want to make the trade so that your opponent can't go play 2 spectacle cards and really just snowball the game. So make sure you make those trades. Oh, Skewer the Critics, that's the name of the card. So yeah, you play your 3-drop and to block, and they attack with their 3-drop, and you decide, okay, I won't block because my 3-drop can adapt next turn and then make a better block or something like that. And then they go Skewer the Critics and another 3-drop. And a 3-drop on their turn or whatever, and you're just you lose the game. So make trades, don't be greedy. And then another thing, leave back extra blockers. There are some haste guys in Rakdos, and there's also a pretty good amount of removal in Rakdos. So if you're like, well, if they don't have a removal spell in their hand, then I can leave back this blocker. Make sure you leave back the extra guy a lot of the time, so you don't just die. But also, on the flip side of that, try to close the game as quickly as you can while being as safe as you can. So because Rakdos does have burn spells with and reach with a lot of their cards. So try not to overextend your aggression and try not to underextend your aggression. It's a fine balance, and that's what's going to make playing against Rakdos a pretty fun battle if they don't just run you over completely. So I think those are the main ways that you're going to be able to combat Rakdos. Anyway, that is going to do it for this guide. As I said at the beginning of the video, be sure to hit that thumbs up if this video gets to 50 thumbs up. I guarantee that I will make another guild guide, though I may make one anyway, you never know. And I probably will, but I want to make sure we get those 50 thumbs up if we can. And leave it in the comment section down below which guild you want to see me make a guide on next. Also, any questions about the cards, about the things I said, leave those in the comments below, or any general questions you have as well. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.